Once you have the shoulder seam pinned, you're ready to just stitch that together. And you're just going to start at one side at 5/8, stitch, back stitch. And I'm going to sew right over the pin because it's keeping my seams perfectly together. And then when you get to the end, stitch, back stitch, and you're all set. So you need to do that for both sides. So let's go to the other side now, since we already pinned it. And we'll do the same thing, starting at the top. Stitch, back stitch, and then I'll stitch right over the pin since it's holding my seams together. And then stitch the ends together. Back stitch. Alright, now this would be a good time to go through everything that you just did and trim off all of these extra little threads that don't need to be there, because you should have quite a few of them at this point. And then we'll need to go to the ironing board to press open the shoulder seams, and we can do that together. So I will video that so that you can see it. So here's the shoulder seam that we just made. I'm just going to press that open now. I don't want to press new wrinkles though. There we go. Okay, and then the other shoulder seam, we're going to do the exact same thing. Lay it flat and just press it open. And now I'm going to trim these. You don't have to trim them, but I don't like to have all the extra fabric whenever I'm wearing things that have interfacing in the shoulders, which they usually do have interfacing in the shoulders. So I'm just going to trim those down to about half, and that will just make it feel better as I'm wearing it. Actually, it's slightly more than a half. Now, the next thing we're going to be doing is hand stitching these shoulders in place. So it's easier for me to go ahead and lay this flat on the ironing board and try to fold in what looks like 5/8. And usually if you hold your understitched pieces on both sides, you can get the general feel for what 5/8 would be. So this is a bit tricky. Just take your time with it. And I'm making sure that my side seam is really flat there too. Okay, so this is with it folded in what looks to me about 5/8, and if I hold both of the sides tight, then that's naturally where they want to go also. So you really can feel it. So I'm just going to press this in place. Because it will be easier for me to stitch it if it's pressed. All right. So that is one side that's prepped and ready for hand stitching. We need to do the same thing to the other side. So doing the same thing for the other side now, I'm going to fold this in the middle so that it is folded at the seam. Then I'm going to hold the sides taut and fold under about 5/8. This is hard to describe, but whenever you're holding everything and you hold it taut, you can feel where the 5/8 is. The fabric will do it naturally, so just trust the fabric. It's hard to explain, but whenever you get in there and start doing it yourself, you'll be able to feel exactly what I'm talking about. Okay. Now don't worry if you put in little wrinkles like this, you can come fix those later. Right now what you really need to focus on is just getting that 5/8 ironed out. Okay, so both of these are ready for hand stitching now. So we're going to take this over. I'll take it to my table that's right here next to me, my big white table, because I think it will be easier for you guys to see the hand stitching there. This side just looked like it could be ironed a little bit better, so I'm just going to give it one more pressing. Ouch! I do that once every project. It never fails. Okay. That feels much better. Okay, so that is what we want. That's what we're aiming for. Oh, it might help if I hold it where you can actually see it a little better. There we go. We have nice clean straps. So I will lay this on the big table next to me where you can see the stitching better, and we will hand stitch these together. So we're now ready to begin our slip stitch so that we can close up our shoulder straps here. So the first thing that you're going to need is a needle. So I have my sewing needle here. And then I have some thread, and I'm just going to use a double threaded needle to do this. So I rolled out a piece of thread that's about as long as my arm, and I'm just going to put that through the needle here and then knot the end. Alright, so I now have a needle, double threaded needle, and the end is knotted twice. And I'm just going to go ahead and trim off the extra thread there. Going to put the needle in through once so that I can hide the knot on the inside. Now this will be interesting trying to sew this where you guys can see it. So we just need to do a slip stitch to close up the section that we just ironed down. So I'm just going to grab a piece of thread from one side, and then I'm going to run it through the other side. So we're just closing these together. So once again, picking up a little bit of thread from one side, and then running the needle through the other side. So this is very easy to do. It's just a quick stitch. We do have a little ways to go with it. And another thing you might want to consider is this piece is my right side of my fabric, so this is the top. So whenever I stitch these together, if anything, I want to make sure that this right side covers my lining here, so that when I wear it, this facing underneath won't pop out unattractively. So you don't want that facing to show once you're wearing the garment. So once again, grabbing a little bit of thread and running it through. Now, I know that I said originally that I would try to film all of this, and I have tried to film all of it as best as I can. I won't film all of the hand stitching, mostly because the camera and also YouTube will not be able to handle all of that footage. So I will do a couple more of these. Once again, grabbing the thread from the inner facing and the facing, and then grabbing a little bit of the fabric from the right side. So if I was to film all of this, we would have at least 30 minutes of footage of me just doing this. So I don't want to do that to you, and I don't want to do that to YouTube. So this is all I'm going to show of this. This is what you'll need to do to close up both of your straps. Grab a little bit of the inner facing and the facing. That's my iron screaming at me. Okay, so you get the idea. That is what you need to do for this shoulder strap and also for the other shoulder strap. So go ahead and hand stitch those together, keeping in mind that you want the right side of your fabric to cover the facing, meaning that if you need to tuck the facing in more so it doesn't show as much, do that, because you want this to look nice and flat when you're done. So go ahead and hand stitch these, because that's going to take a little while, and then come back and join me again. This is what your strap should look like after you've finished all of the hand stitching. So they're nice, pretty. I ironed them, they're laying flat. Now what we're going to do is flip this to the inside. And we're going to tack down the inside facing to the jumpsuit. So here's my inner facing and facing piece. And this is the right side of my nice fabric. And I'm just going to lay the seam on top of the other seam. Slightly flip this up. And then take my needle and thread and just tack that in place. There we go. I had to use the table a second. My needle did not want to go through. I'm still using a double threaded needle in case anyone was wondering. Alright, so that takes care of one. Leave it just a little bit loose. So pull on it just a little bit before you knot it and close it off, and that's just so that it has movement and you don't create a pucker on the right side of your fabric. So if I pull this out and look at my facing, I can find the next seam, and the next seam that I find where the facing and the jumpsuit match up, that's where I'm going to do this a second time. So let me zoom in closer this time so you can see it. So here's my seam. This is my inner facing, and I'm just turning it to the inside and laying it flat. Then I'm just going to slightly turn this up and start hand stitching that down. So grabbing a little bit of the jumpsuit and a little bit of the interfacing. Don't make it too tight. Alright, and that's good. You really don't need that much. It just holds it in place as you're wearing it so that it doesn't pop out. Knot that twice. And then cut off the extra thread. And then I'll knot my needle again because I still have thread left over. That's why I like to start with a long piece of thread, because sometimes I can get all the seams tacked with just one piece, and it just makes things go a little bit more quickly. Okay, so this one is done. Moving on to the other side seam. We did the front. So here's the other side seam. Once again, just going to lay this flat. Then slightly turn up the end. Grab a little bit of the jumpsuit and then tack it to the interfacing. And I'll just tack that down and knot it. I feel like this one needs one more knot. There, that feels really nicely secured. Alright, now my thread is too little, so I will get a new piece of thread. And we are now going to be working on the back, so let me zoom out so you can see that. So this is our top. We just tacked this front interfacing down, the side interfacing, and the side interfacing here. Now we're going to be working on the back because we still have these open leftover fabric sections. So go ahead and grab the jumpsuit and move it however you need to best access the back. For me, that's going to be sideways because that's how I need to stitch. And I'm just going to fold this in. So here's that extra piece. I'm just going to fold that in on itself and then fold it down. And then it lands just perfectly on top of that back piece. And we're just going to hand stitch that in place. So I need my needle and thread again. I'm going to use a double threaded needle. Pretty much all I do hand stitching with is a double threaded needle. So this one I'm just going to do a quick slip stitch on. So just pick up thread from both sides and that will just gently hold them in place. And I'll zoom in on the next one so that you guys can see the stitching more clearly. Okay, so here's the other side of my back. So I'm just going to flip this piece in on itself and then turn that in like that. And now we're ready to start stitching that. All right, so I will pop my needle through the top here. And then my slip stitch, I'm just going to grab a little bit of the right side of the fabric and just run the needle straight through the interfacing. This stitch is very visible, but it's on the inside, so no one will see it. So once again, just grabbing a little of the right side of the fabric and running it straight through. A little bit of the fabric and running it straight through. Slip stitch is great because it's very easy to do and it's fast. Alright, and then now that we're at the last one, I'm ready to knot that in place. Just going to pull a little bit on it to make sure it's not too tight anywhere because we don't want bulges on the outside. Then I'll make a small knot here on the inside. And then just double knot that. Then put the needle through right next to the knot, in between the layers. Pull it out the other end, and then cut off that extra thread. Alright, so that takes care of our two back pieces. Now we only have two more things that we need to do, and one of those things is sew on a hook and eye. So if you don't have your hook and eye handy, go grab it and come back and join me, and we will attach the hook and eye so that we can close the back piece like so. We are now getting very close to being finished. We just have to sew on the hook and eye. So these are the hook and eyes that I am using, and I will of course link to everything below if you want any of the stuff that I have here. You can also just go to Joann Fabrics or Hobby Lobby has these. I think most Walmarts still have hook and eyes. So there's the hook and eye. And we're just going to sew those on, and that will hold the back of the jumpsuit together because we don't have a zipper or anything. We basically just have this flap in back, and that's how we're going to get in and out of the thing. Okay, so here's my back piece, and I need these two pieces to close like this. So that's where we're going to put our hook and eye, so go ahead and just flip that so that you're working on the wrong side of the fabric. And I'm going to sew my eye on first. I like to do the hook last, it's just my personal preference. And I actually need to switch my needle. I have this thick needle that I like to use for slip stitching and stuff like that, but that is not good for a hook and eye. For a hook and eye, it's much easier to sew if you have a nice thin needle. So let me grab a thin needle. So let me show you the difference. This is the needle that I went to get that I want to sew with, and this is the one that I was doing the other stitches with. See how different they are? So a smaller one like this is much better for sewing on a hook and eye. So I'm now ready to sew the eye on. I'm going to grab my back piece. This is the top of my back piece. And you want to place the eye at the top. And you also want to place it so that it's completely covered by the fabric. So don't sew it so that it's hanging off the edge. You want it to be completely on the fabric. And that's because if it's not completely on the fabric, whenever you close it while you're wearing it, people will be able to see the eye, and it just doesn't look very attractive. Okay, so I'm holding that right on the fabric, and then I'm just going to start stitching it in place. with my double threaded needle that has a knot. And I'll try to keep this centered so that you can see it on camera, but I will also be the first to admit to you that it's hard to sew a hook and eye while you're holding it for the camera and not for your eyes. This is very far away from my face right now. Okay, I'm going to turn it a little so I can get a better angle. And then when I'm ready to switch to the other side, I'll just put my needle through the fabric next to the spot I'm working on and take it underneath the fabric to the next hole. And that's just because it looks nicer. You don't want to have loose thread hanging out back here because you could accidentally put your hook through it whenever you're trying to put it on this eye. Okay, I'm going to turn this one more time. It's just easier to keep turning it as you hand stitch. It's easier to get the angles. So as you can see, this is very easy to do. It's a little time consuming. Okay, so this is secure now, so I'm just going to make a knot. And then knot it again. Put the needle through just like we did all the other hand stitching. Run it in between the layers, pop it back out, and then cut off that extra thread. And now I do need a new piece of thread before I sew on the hook. Let me just rethread my needle here. Now to sew on your hook, what I would recommend is going ahead and actually hooking it onto the eye you just sewed. Oh, preferably without dropping it. Okay, and then that will just help you line this up because you don't just want to freehand sew it. You want to actually hold your pieces together because when you stitch on the hook, you want to make this back section match up as perfectly as you can. And see how if I lay this flat, it looks nice, but if I actually put some weight on it and press it, you can see there's a gap here. So you want to almost layer it slightly on top, and that's so that when you're wearing it and the fabric pulls just a little bit, it will stay together because it just looks nicer. So let me go ahead and flip this. If you don't feel confident in holding your material, you can also just take a pen or a pencil and just mark 2 little dots where you need to sew on your hook if that makes you more comfortable. I will do this on camera to the best of my ability, but this is hard to film. So I have once again my double threaded needle with a knot. I'm just tacking this in place. A little knot there that I don't like. There we go. Okay, and I have to turn this now because it's too awkward to sew like that. And now I'll just keep stitching. Now I know I still have to model this for you guys, but I can go ahead and tell you I've enjoyed this pattern a lot. The fact that it can be put together in a day is also to me a huge plus. The next time I just want to put something together quickly, I could pull one of these out and just sew it in a few hours. I almost did this one entirely in a day. I finished everything, mostly everything yesterday, and then today is my second day, and it's just because when I got to the tacking of the facing and also adding the hook and eye, it was quite late after a dinner party that I've been to, and I was just not in the mood to stay up and keep filming. So that's the only reason I've had to do this part in the next day. But other than that, you could easily sew this pattern in not even a whole day, maybe a half a day. So what you're seeing me doing here is I keep aligning that V in the back, and that's because I want to keep stitching in a way that will keep that lined up as best as possible in the back. I need to turn this one more time so I can get to the other side now. Once again, lining up my back pieces. This is my faux thumb helper today. What are those called? I forget what they're called. Thimbles. That's what I'm trying to say. It's my faux thimble of the day. Alright, one more here, I think. A little bit of a thread wanting to do something wonky. There we go. Okay. That's pretty good. So if I pull on it a little, it has a little bit of a gap, but not too much. So I could have taken that over even a little bit more, but I'm happy with this. This is nice for me. So now I'm just going to knot the ends off here. So tie my knot, tie another knot, run the needle through right next to the knot, and then cut off that extra thread. All right, and if you have followed along in all the steps, you are now done. That's all there is. The last thing I would tell you to do, and why I said before there was one more step, is because you should go press everything now before you wear this. So let me show you what mine looks like. So here's the top of my jumpsuit. It's very cute. I have a nice flat V in the front, and then the back has that hook and eye that we just did. And then we have our nice pointed corners on each side, along with our leg holes. Oh, a little bit of thread here. So if you haven't already, go ahead and take this to your ironing board and just press it so it looks really nice when you wear it. And press the top. Be careful not to melt your interfacing by just holding the iron. Just give it a gentle pressing like you would any other garment you have in your closet, and then enjoy wearing it. So I will show you in the next video whenever I talk about things that I enjoyed about the pattern or didn't like about the pattern, and I will also wear this so that you can see what mine looks like on me. So subscribe, please. Please subscribe. If you don't want to subscribe, help me out by leaving a comment below whether or not you liked this video, or maybe there's another sew along that you would like to see. Just share any thoughts that you want with me, and I will see you guys next week whenever I model the jumpsuit. Thank you. Bye. Stay kawaii.